By the 50s, he contributed the land to the city of Bakersfield and the financing to build the first blood bank. And it was all in the name of my great-grandmother, Sarah Alice Houchin, who had some serious medical issues back in West Virginia, and they didn't have blood.
You just heard Morgan Houchin. Morgan Houchin, accredited land consultant specializing in the acquisition and sale of agricultural use properties. He has sold over 60,000 plus acres of ranches and properties throughout California, totaling over $900 million in transactional value over the last 10 years. He's a third-generation family farming operation specializing in almonds, pistachios, cotton, onions, and tomatoes. He partners in several family-owned and operated farming and agricultural service businesses. In today's show, we discussed the Houchin family legacy. Later in the show, we talked about how Morgan shines in the ag real estate market with expertise. And be sure to stay tuned to hear the rapid-fire answers from Morgan.
Welcome back to the Our 2 Cents podcast, the show where your local professionals sit down with an array of guests to hear their story and impart some wisdom for both business and life-improving skills. This is your place to hear business and community leaders discuss relevant topics that matter to you.
And welcome to the show. This is Troy Burton. I am your host today of Our 2 Cents podcast. I am co-hosting today, back in the saddle with Kyle W. Jones. It's been a while since we've tag teamed, and we're getting back to that model. I'm looking forward to having a three-way conversation with our guest today. And he also...
a lot of innuendos you just thrown in there. I don't know if anyone has caught that.
Kyle, I'm glad you said that. I was like, I'm kind of the new guy here. Is someone going to say something?
This is not that type of podcast, just so your listeners are aware. It just so happens that Troy's beaten to a different drum today.
And our guest brought another guest to learn, watch, take notes, and take some pictures. Welcome, Stephanie. Hey, before we get started, everybody, we'd love you to come check us out. Stay in touch with us. Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, our webpage, of course, and our newsletter, and now on YouTube. Stay in touch with us. You can see what we're doing, and we love to hear from you as well. Morgan, we are happy to have you join us today. Thanks for being here. Before we get started, I'm going to throw it out, and we're going to just go back. I don't know how far, because I couldn't do too much research. We have Morgan Houchin, the Tech Ag Financial. But before we get into the business of Tech Ag, I really want to talk about the Houchin name, the Houchin family, the legacy that you have. I think you're third generation. So take us on a road trip. We see community themed with Houchin's name on it, the Houchin Blood Bank, maybe Houchin Road. That's about all I can add. So now I'm going to let you fill in the blanks and give us a little bit of a picture there.
Yeah. Kyle, thanks for having me.
Yeah, good to see you again.
Yeah, thank you. Really appreciate you guys having me on and spending some time with me. Yes, the Houchin family has been around and in Bakersfield for some time. When you talk about our family, the kind of centerpiece that really started it all for us was Clarence Elmer Houchin, C.E. Houchin, or as everyone called him, Elmer. Elmer Houchin was from Huntington, West Virginia. The Houchin family's from Huntington, West Virginia. He was born 1884, something like that. Came to Bakersfield by virtue of getting a job with Miller and Lux. So Henry Miller and Charles Lux, they were kind of California land barons in the cattle business. And Elmer got a job with them. He was a smart guy, resourceful guy, was able to make his way from West Virginia to California with virtually nothing. That's why he left. The family was starving over there. Mm-hmm. And so he got a job with them kind of as a real estate guy. And Miller and Lux bought via like Spanish land grants, went and picked up a ton of land from San Joaquin, where they were kind of headquartered, Los Banos area, all the way down to the Los Angeles area. And in total, maybe about 1.4 million acres. And it was holdings that they had, but the main business of how they cash flowed it was cattle grazing. And so Elmer Houchin, my great uncle, set up a shop in Buttonwillow, which was a lake bottom. And when it would flood and dry out, it kicked off a lot of feed. And so they hired him to kind of create section, township, ranges, home sites to kind of develop it out. From there, he got into the butcher and meat business. He had a meat market in Taft. In those days, I mean, it doesn't sound like much now, but that was a real horse that created a lot of a lot of cash flow that he was able to leverage, and started to get into the real estate business and buy land off of Miller and Lux. They would lay off ranches to him, various parcels of land, and started to build quite the real estate empire. Between that, the meat market, and got into some other businesses. And he had his other two brothers come out and help him. One was my other great uncle, Oak Houchin. I mean, these names are great. It's great.
Can't be Elmer and Oak.
Oh, it gets even better. I mean, depending on how deep we go here. Tried to name some of my kids some of these, and I got pushback.
It's funny. It's not you. It's everybody.
Yeah. No, it's great. Yeah. It's history. It's awesome.
It's like listening to you is like me telling the same story. Yeah. I got Irvin and Melvin.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Mildred.
Well, Oak's kids were Dutch Okie, who everyone called Junior.
Sure.
And so and then the youngest brother was my grandfather,
right?
Lester Houchin. Oak was seemed to be more of a farmer. We've been in the farming business for 3 generations, and a lot of the ranches that we were farming cotton as a family, and wheat and hay. Oak and his family kind of ran with that. My grandfather was the youngest and was a business guy, and kind of worked with Elmer to, Elmer would do deals, was very sharp, would kind of come in and put everything together, fund the capital to do it. And then my grandfather was very administratively back office. He was family. Elmer trusted him, and he would come in and kind of put everything together to manage. The Houchin Blood Bank was something, as Elmer by the 1950s started to accumulate a fair amount in terms of resources.
Okay.
Actually, backing up before 1951, I think, when he started the Houchin Blood Bank, he developed Westchester. So Westchester was his development. He bought that land from the Kern County Land Company in 1945, and then developed it out to about 800 lots and certain areas of land that were either going to accommodate businesses or just set aside, I'll wait, maybe this gets more valuable and I'll just hold this.
Right.
And so, did that in the 40s, and then by the 50s, he contributed the land to the city of Bakersfield and the financing to build the first blood bank. And it was all in the name of my great-grandmother, Sarah Alice Houchin, who had some serious medical issues back in West Virginia, and they didn't have blood. Kind of as a good son and a good person, no one should have to go through that. Family or in this community, and so that was kind of the impetus of the blood bank, which it's a not-for-profit foundation. Sure. And that was to really kind of back up the genuine nature of this is what we're doing. We're not trying to make money with it, and we're not really involved, but we're very proud of it.
I was going to ask you, the family has nothing really to do with it all anymore, other than the name and the land that was given to generate
just the name and the the feel good story that we have some relation to it. But other than that, I mean, honestly, I could give more blood. I could be a better donor. I don't know a lot of the management there, and very proud of it. But yeah, our family kind of has a completely separate type of business. I
know we talked to you a little about the history of it. So prior to Virginia, what's the background of the Houchin family? I'm assuming European of some sort. Where did they settle? Where did they come from to settle in Virginia?
My dad he's a great guy, really easygoing, fun guy to be around. But you really got to pull information out of him. He's outside of being in the fertilizer business, which is kind of our core business. He's a cowboy, and I think he loved being on ranches and working with livestock because you didn't have to talk to him. So what I understand, with that being said, is that we're of German and English descent, is what my understanding is. But
okay.
Have I done, a spit test and genealogy? I would love to do it to kind of go to him and be like, well, it turns out you were wrong.
Right.
But as of right now, I mean, where I come from is the Houchins come from West Virginia, and then my mom's family is Torgianis, which live in Buttonwillow.
Okay.
And they're from Lucca, Italy. So when people ask where I come from, I'm kind of I'm a Mediterranean hillbilly.
There you go.
Kind of how I describe myself.
It's fun. I did the I can't remember if I did Ancestry or 23andMe because my kids did one, I did the other. But anyway, I did that, and what I thought was my history or heritage was completely off base. Yeah. My grandma, I know, is from the Azores in Portugal, right? Azore Island. So she's was born there, right? And then I was told that on my mom's side, there's a lot of Native American. So I do my genealogy test, and I had like 7% Portuguese. I had no Native American, and I was like predominantly like Great Britain and France and like Dutch. That's not to say that none of that's accurate, but where my genes came from obviously didn't come from where I thought my heritage was. So it's interesting when that plays out.
West Virginia, is that like Blue Ridge Mountains?
Huntington, which actually I think is pretty close to where University of West Virginia is located.
Most of you guys in the farming world, when they started, was that all Buttonwillow?
No, so Buttonwillow, the Houchins are the only non-Lucca Italian residents. There's a few others, but primarily everyone that farms in Buttonwillow, with the exception of the Houchin family, all come from Lucca, Italy. And they came from Lucca, and they landed in like the Oakland area, kind of made a quick stop in Firebaugh.
Okay.
And then kind of migrated down to Buttonwillow. I don't know, Miller and Lux had jobs. There was some housing there. There was an opportunity to be, some tenant farming and break-in ground, these different leases. So I don't know if that's what drew them. I knew Miller and Lux brought the Houchin family via Elmer there. And then my grandpa, who's from Lucca, they came from, just kind of traveled down from north and settled in Buttonwillow and said, this is where it'll be.
Wow, that's interesting. Yeah. And Kyle, I also learned that big farmers hang out with big farmers. So your wife is a Jamara.
Yeah.
I've heard that name. Where have I heard that name before?
It's kind of a big name in Bakersfield. And then your brother, Clayton, married her sister.
Yeah, also is a Jamara.
Which is a Jamara.
Yeah.
Who got married? Who was first?
So my brother's older,
okay.
5 years older than me, and married his wife, Juliana, first.
Okay.
And Jill and I were at the wedding. We were not dating.
Knew each other?
Oh, yeah. We grew up, went to elementary school together, and were, boyfriend, girlfriend, went to Cotillion back when Cotillion was around for kids. Went to Heritage School together.
Yep.
There's pictures at our wedding. There was pictures of me with like a bowl cut, missing my front teeth, and her with a perm, and at Cotillion. And so we were a little boyfriend, girlfriend. And when our siblings got married, they had a beautiful wedding in Santa Barbara, and we were friends. And she was dating somebody else. I was dating somebody else, and we've always been, good friends, but it wasn't until when I lived back in Boston and came home to join my family's business that she and I reconnected, and everything kind of just fell into place. It was pretty scandalous at first. We were a little concerned on what the optics looked like on that, and if it was just a fling sort of thing, we were worried. Well, we were worried that my brother and her sister would be upset. But 11 years later,
worked out
3
okay.
kids, it's working out okay.
That's awesome. Yeah. You know what? So I've known you for a few years, not real well, from Stockdale, the gym, golf course.
Yeah.
I know the Jamars from the same reason.
Yeah.
I never knew anybody until I joined Stockdale.
Yeah.
And then, we invite you on. I start doing a little research, and I'm going, wow, he's married to Jamara. I even told Mariah, I go, guess who he's married to? And she goes, who? I go, Jamara. And she goes, of course.
Yeah.
You mentioned Boston. Was that where you went to school?
So I went to school first. I have 3 siblings. I have an older sister who's about 8 years older than me. I have an older brother who's about 5 years older than me, and then there's me. My sister went to boarding school at Robert Louis Stevenson in Monterey, and had a good experience there. But my brother learned about the sport of lacrosse and started watching it, and wanted to play. And then there was lacrosse camp. Lacrosse is
huge back east,
huge back east, but it's really growing in California. When we were growing up, it was non-existent.
Right.
I didn't know it was growing now. There's Andrews
and Inovich is really doing a great job of getting youth participation at maybe the junior high school level, really getting into it and taking them to compete in tournaments, over in the coastal areas or down south in LA. And so, but at that time, there was a couple of boarding schools that had the sport. And so my brother learned about it from my sister going to boarding school, and then he went to boarding school and played and excelled and went to college at Colby College in Maine. And then he's my older brother, 5 years older, that age gap. I just idolized him. I went to RLS for 2 years and then transferred to a school in Connecticut, Salisbury School, played there, and then was recruited, played in college at Colgate. And then after graduated from Colgate, my 3 closest buddies who were from back east, moved to Boston. And so I kind of scraped together what I could, and we rented an apartment, and just kind of a hey, we'll figure this out. 6 years later, lived there and worked in the high tech business, and then my brother, after he graduated from business school, came and said, hey, I think we need. I'm trying to build something here, and it needs some diversity. It could use a guy like you, and would you come back and join us? And fast forward 14 years later from that, here I am.
So Colgate's New York.
Colgate is New York. It's upstate New York.
Hamilton?
East of Syracuse, yes.
Yeah.
It's freezing up there.
Of course it is.
Yeah.
Now, had you not gotten the call from your brother, were you otherwise have come back to Bakersfield, or don't know?
50-50.
Okay.
Our business at the time was pretty focused on certain areas that I don't know, would have room for me,
right,
as far as professional growth and like personal fulfillment. And B, Boston was a great city, and I was working for a high-tech company that had a real niche, at least for the time being, in that space that differentiated us from others like us. And so sales were good, monetarily. I was starting to make money, real money for the first time. Lived in the north end of Boston. With being in sales, had Red Sox tickets.
Yeah.
Oh yeah,
you could go to the Celtics.
Drive anywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so it was
fun.
It was fun.
Yeah.
And but he was definitely an impetus that he can be a persuasive guy when he wants to, and planted some seeds. And I think it was I'm happy about it. It was the right decision, and it added a lot of well-rounded aspects to. Been around and worked in different spaces, lived different places, and I would encourage any young kid, to do that. You learn a lot getting outside of your immediate environment.
I agree 100%. And it
Out of your
seems like
comfort zone.
a lot of times we do come back to our roots, but at least you get that experience to know what it's like, and to have some freedom and make some of your own decisions, good or bad.
Yeah.
And then figure out what's important to you, and then you settle in. But so you came back to Cali. Your family has several different companies, but I think mostly ag-related. Button Willow Warehouse, which has been around forever. I've known them for years. Mission Ag, Elk Grove Farming. But you're in the agricultural real estate market now, which is tech ag.
Yes.
Was that existing before you came here, or is that your baby?
That's my baby.
Okay.
It was there was ideas of maybe this could be a good fit for you, and we could help you get going with the idea was that leveraging you work for these big high-tech companies. They do a really good job of investing in their salespeople and teaching you sales as a process, as it relates to a complex sale where you're trying to sell a product or a service to multiple stakeholders. So my brother, who's a smart guy, thought that, hey, if you have that skill set today, you've been around farming your whole life, whether you know it or not. You've been around ranches your whole life, and through the warehouse, which has grown to be a fairly expansive company, about 11 different locations across 14 counties, and 250 people, work for it. We have connections with growers. Right. Maybe you could pull all this together and start a real estate company. And so, hey, that sounds like a great story. How do I make money day one? Because the bills, I the bills keep coming.
30 days later, I owe money somewhere.
Sales aren't just going to happen overnight. And so,
especially in that space, right? It's not like you're selling a 1,500 square foot track house where you got 1,000 or 50,000 buyers.
Yeah,
that's
exactly right. And I found out early there was about 3 to 4 years where working my tail off and just trying to get my name out, letting people know, hey, I know you know my family, but no one really seems to know me and seems to know what it is that I'm doing. And I think I think if you give me a shot with your ranch, your family's ranch, which by the way is a lot of these families, I mean, their pride, the sentimental attachment to their ground, and their whole estate, their equity, everything is tied in that ground. So the decision of what to do with that not only is a big decision monetarily, but a big decision in terms of trust, and will you do the right thing by us and handle this in a manner that we only get to do it once. So when I look back on it, I want to look back and make sure it was done the right way. It takes a while to get someone to go out on that limb with you, and I really learned to respect that over the first 4 years of my career. And it wasn't until about 2011 where I had my first real shot, real opportunity to sell a meaningful ranch with some meaningful players, and from there just never really looked back. And it kind of evolved where it was just it's always been just kind of me handling all aspects of it, and been able to expand to where I have an agent who I really think the world of, is doing a great job on my license. So it's me as the broker of record, an agent on my license, and then Stephanie came on board with us 2 years ago and has really done a lot to kind of usher us into this new world of creating a brand on social media, and really working to kind of diligently touch that on a regular basis to advertise sales or different things that you guys know the
I see it.
We're seeing it. New listings just closed. Yep.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Yeah.
Yep. Absolutely.
Yeah. And so
and who's the agent? I don't.
John Moore.
Okay.
Really good guy. When I wasn't looking for an agent, I didn't really want to have a big agency. I wanted to be just a small, laser focused. I hate the word boutique. It sounds like I'm selling dresses, but, a boutique firm,
specialty firm. Yeah.
And then agriculture real estate. That's what I do. And so he called me and really wanted to talk about real estate, and he's, at the time, he was the president of the Farm Bureau, and his family's fourth generation
more
farming
farms,
and more farms. And so I thought, this is a guy that we have a personal connection, and I think he'll do it the right way. And so he's going through, that front end growth pain that I was, talking about. He's going through that. And that was one of the things. I was like, I hope the farm can kick off income for you as because there won't be much of it as you get started.
So let's talk about that journey. So you made a decision, we're going to start a real estate company in the ag business. And you know that you're not going to get paid day one, maybe not the first year. Who knows? You got to learn the business, create relationships, get an opportunity, which you mentioned. You needed to do something in the meantime. What did you do, and what was your focus, and how did you get to where you are today?
So what I did was I squirreled away from the high-tech business a little cheese that I could nibble off of while getting going. So
you kept your relationship with that old company while
he said he had a nest egg.
A nest egg. Oh, okay. I had some money saved up.
I missed the
the reference.
Taft education. Sorry.
And then my dad, who's a tough guy but fair, was like, hey, we can maybe set something up that if that's not enough, you're gonna need a home. You're gonna need that money.
We might need a
saved up.
forklift driver or something.
Yeah. Well, I'll give you a loan. And this is something that is going to have some teeth to it that you got to pay back, but we'll float you as you go through this. And so I had kind of a little plan to pay bills that I could work off of, and then in terms of getting started, really went through and went to who's been our longtime family friends, and I could get with and meet with and just hit the road to make rounds and talk to and let them know that I'm back and that this is where I'm focusing. And in addition to getting in front of people who may or may not be interested sellers but could help me with referrals, I spent a lot of time in my pickup with maps, getting to know, kind of seeing where, hey, land is going to be land. What could be dynamic and changing over time is water. So I started to drive and get to know in where different water district boundaries are, and then stopped in water district offices to let me understand, where do you get your water? How big are you? How much water do you totally bring in, cumulatively into this area? What are the contracts that provide for that? How do you charge? What's your cost? And I did that first with, getting to know my own water district in Buttonwillow, and then moving over to Shafter-Wasco Irrigation District and getting to know their costs, and then Semi-Tropic, which is probably the biggest of those three, their cost, Rosedale, Rio Bravo to the east of us. And then through that, it's just amazing how when people see you around a lot and get, a little bit of a flavor and that trust that, hey, you're really working hard, you seem to be getting access to knowledge. And there was an older gentleman who my family knew, who basically said, I'll work with Morgan for, I got about 2 to 3 years. And he was a banker. an old banker that we got to know through a past, real estate project.
Relationship.
That my family, yeah. And he was very helpful outside of me doing that. He was very helpful in me understanding, ag economics. And when people say it doesn't pencil or it pencils, putting together those models to really understand and help me with he was not the most extroverted guy, but really helped me with the underwriting, part of it, and moving me towards seeing the world through a discounted cash flow analysis and internal rate of returns. And so that helped kind of build that aspect. And so, I pulled all these together and then eventually found myself in a spot to get on the inside track on where a good size 1,100 acre ranch was going to sell south of Bakersfield, and was able to kind of get to know what that property is, and another relationship of a bigger company that was looking to get into the almond business, and married those two and got into a real deal. And I've never really gone back and thought about from there where it happened, but that was like,
that's how it first came together.
Yeah, that was the first spark, and then from there it just that led to something else. And now, if you were to look back on our business over 14 years, we've closed close to $850 million in transactional value.
I saw that close. $1 billion is going to be right around the corner.
Yeah.
That's
in 12 years?
In 14 years. Yeah.
That's pretty amazing.
And 143 ranches. So 143 transactions. And so it's gotten to a point that when you help a family, and you're in those inner circle meetings, it's no longer about like commissions or compensation. It's about, we started with a meeting, we had an idea, we started out doing this, and project fulfillment, and seeing that, this was done in a way that you can tell the family's grateful and that the process they enjoyed, and you kind of really build a connection. That whole start to finish experience is what the real estate business is. Not always very glamorous. There's times you get tired. The ball does not always bounce your way.
Sure.
Getting out of bed and picking up the phone and grinding it out, day in and day out. It can get tough. That experience and chasing that down is what really is a big motivational.
I heard you say something that I've dealt with myself, and I've heard many people in sales. I've been in sales my whole life, and it's truly, yes, you got to know the facts. You got to know what you're doing. You got to be efficient. You got to be professional. But it all comes down to one thing, and it's a relationship and trust.
Yeah.
And that's probably what you did. First thing you mentioned is I went out and I met all the people that my family's known for years, introduced myself, tell them what I'm trying to do, educate, learn. That is why I really wanted to hear you say, because that's what people need to understand. It's hard work and so much feet on the ground before you really see a return on that investment.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And you said something earlier, which I think, in the spirit of this podcast of doing business in a community like Bakersfield, you said good word travels slow, bad word travels fast.
Before you get home, your family's already heard.
And that's something that, especially with farmers and those in the ag community, you can do 1,000 rights, but if you make a decision that is, a material decision that's going to impact negatively a family, and you that could be the end, or you could spend, years working yourself out of that hole.
But I think to differentiate a little bit, a mistake is okay. Bakersfield community, I think we understand mistakes, honest mistakes. I think what you're getting at is if you do something that's malicious or deceitful or something that seems to benefit yourself as opposed to your client, that's the one that you dig yourself out of the hole of. An honest mistake, I don't want to make it seem like Bakersfield's like a ruthless, but
as an attorney,
gross
negligence is understandable. Wrong and willful misconduct is what I was getting.
No bueno.
Right.
Or even simple negligence. We don't have to go gross negligence. Simple negligence. Hey, Morgan, real quick, Troy, just to piggyback off what you said, another thing you said I think is important for anyone out there who's younger and just starting their careers or their entrepreneurial path. You mentioned something about getting in front of people that they may not be wanting to sell a ranch, but you're going to get to know them anyway, but they may be wanting to sell a ranch 5 years from now or 3 years from now. And that is true in every business.
Or know somebody that's willing to sell.
Every client I meet, or every potential client I meet, that's what I treat them as. They may not need my services now, but if you make a good impression and you show that you know what you're doing, that you're honest, that you're hardworking, who are they going to think of 2 years from now when they do need your service? And so that's important.
And that kind of goes to what you said earlier, and that, these aren't 2,200 square foot homes. Our average deal size ranges between 5 to 6 million, and it's their most important asset. So the relationship and getting to where, if we do get to that point, 5 to 6 years from now, you have built with us a trust and have demonstrated a certain character over time. It absolutely leads to that, and so that's a big part of it. It's not, there's no immediate instant gratification in a lot of this.
And you said this earlier, and I actually learned this doing insurance business in the ag world with many farmers. Their land is their legacy. And you mentioned it's deep, it's third generation, it touches home, and they want to know that it's going to be taken care of proper. They want to sell it to the right person. But when I talk about ag real estate or the sale of property or the buying of property, Morgan, why are you seeing property change hands? And I know there's a lot of different reasons, but what is the biggest reason you see people wanting to exchange property or let it go? Or
this is going to touch on a topic that I think everybody's very familiar with, especially if you live in Bakersfield or anywhere in the Central Valley that has farming as its a core competency of its economy. We have a real water problem.
Yes.
And I'm not someone that's going to act like natural resources are not something that we got to handle as a society, a standard of care with. But there is politics of water and decisions being made on what to do with the water that's available that are coming out of Sacramento that have disproportionately affected us in the southernmost part of the Central Valley. And as an owner of a ranch, one of the main motivations that they've seen, that I see of a potential sale or interest in selling, is that water to my property is potentially going to become less available and is without a doubt going to become more expensive. So me operating the property could potentially see some pressure on the margins, the net operating income that I'm going to see from operating my farm, and on almost to double side it or double dip it, I could potentially be losing value as far as my equity and my appreciation that I have in my ranch, which, like we mentioned, is a core part to their estate. That is one of the hardest things of seeing that merge with the sentimental attachment and love of the land that families that more often than not have owned these ranches for at a minimum 50 to 60 years. And it's tough, but that's the main motivation of where
But if there's a water problem, which there is everywhere in the Central Valley or the whole state of California, and I probably can expand it even farther than that, what makes it attractive to someone to purchase?
Well, so
I'm sure there's a lot of reasons, logistics, and I mean we can go into some of that. But if you're telling me we want to sell because my margins are getting so low because the cost of water, if I can get it, is so high, it's just not the profitable business, but I have a passion for it because it's our legacy, third generation. Why would someone else come in and gobble it up if it's so difficult to farm?
Yeah. So owning a ranch, buying a ranch, operating a ranch, all of those are very capital intensive. When you own a ranch, there's no small bills. A repair and maintenance ticket on average, for your well, something with your irrigation system, a foliar spray, any sort of application that you'd be doing, you're talking 25, 30 grand. That can be spent on just any sort of item that you would a
very typical line item.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. And that cost is going up. Buyers of land are basically, for the sake of this discussion, will fit into three buckets. First, if someone sells, a ranch that maybe they felt was not in the best interest long run, they'll use those deferred gains to basically roll it into another piece of property and continue farming that, but feel that maybe location, soil, water is a step above. Maybe it's less acres but better acres. You'll see that transaction happen. That's more of a trade.
Okay.
Secondly, the buyers are a lot of the clients that are direct farmers, so not these institutional funds or private equity funds that actively buy land. They typically have an operation that's of a certain scale that a lot of these costs they can spread across that enterprise, and more often than not, they're involved in other businesses that they can get multiple bites of the apple. So, for example, this would be like a family that owns a lot of ranches, has a lot of retained earnings in their business from high commodity markets, which we saw with almonds, from 2008 to 2013. And they're also in the processing business. So that volume, they can kind of incrementally make gains throughout the whole, production process. They'll want to actively, expand their enterprise. There's tons of tax advantages that come with this too, outside of income potential, that you get that, reading one of the quickest ways to wealth is just finding a way to plan around your tax bill and retain what you already earned.
Right.
So you'll see that as a motivation of buying a ranch. And, we're talking about, selling ranches and water issues, but when things are good in farming and you match yield with good commodity prices,
right.
I mean, you can make some gains that will be, in some instances, could be life-altering in terms of your business, which often corresponds with you as an individual, in our community, small business owners. Last but not least, there's a lot of insurance companies that have, a portfolio of investments that they need to make and reinvest premiums in, and it's in that portfolio, it's almost like a pie chart. So within the hard asset allocation, farming is a portion of that. And they like to do deals and really big deals, and they have a checklist that they need to meet, and they're active buyers of land as well. So, I mean, and as far as an asset class, I mean, yes, we're looking at water potentially driving some sort of adjustment and valuation, but we've been dealing with water legislation and the issue of drought for a long time. 2014 is when the state of California passed the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. And in the face of all that, land values have continued to stay stable or go up. So it's a very resilient class. It's a great hedge against inflation. And at the end of the day, Warren Buffett will tell you, throw crypto in the trash, buy a ranch with good water.
Yep.
And thank God that not at this most recent conference he had in Omaha, but the previous one, he said that, and it was a shot in the arm to my business. And if he's listening, which I have no doubt he is, Troy, I want to thank him.
I'll send it to him if he's not.
Yeah.
Do you ever see property changing hands because of state tax issues?
Yeah, unfortunately.
Yeah, I see a lot of that old school mentality, didn't do a whole lot of good planning and need to sell property to pay a state tax. So you are seeing that here. Even though the estate tax number is fairly high, it is high, but it does come into play in the ag world.
There more and more people are getting savvy about estate planning and understanding that it takes time, and there's strategies that you can put in place that will help your family preserve those assets. But it wasn't always that way, as you mentioned. And in fact, when talking to my dad, the old days, when land came up for sale, it was the 3 Ds.
Right.
Debt, divorce, and death. And, and that still is the case, but thank goodness we're seeing that shrink a little bit, where some older school guys would view lack of estate planning as some sort of tool of control within the family environment. Mm-hmm. And I think guys are, understanding that is pretty provincial minded, and we're seeing a lot of that kind of go away. But yeah, I mean, that can be a motivator to sell farm ground, or quite frankly, any asset.
No, I've seen major, awesome business models sell, and you're shaking your head going, why in the world would they sell that thing? It's just a sewing machine. It's just perfect. Yeah. And then after a while, it kind of comes out. Estate tax, transfer of wealth. You had to pay the state taxes, no cash flow, had to liquidate. Yeah. And so you do see that. Yeah. So I'm going to try to get in your head a little bit. So as a ag consultant, I'm assuming, because I have a little bit of ag background. I was born on a farm. Yeah. I was never a farmer. My dad worked on a farm in Cuyama, matter of fact. Yeah. So, and we dabble a little bit in the farm world on a side deal, but I'm assuming that when you see a property that you got to go out and do some research. You maybe figure out what type of soils they have, acidity, the nutrients in the soil, because, maybe it's not good for growing all crops. So you got to find that perfect, maybe it's an alfalfa situation or whatever the situation is. Probably previous use, drainage, access to the resources, how far is it from processing and shipping and so on, even though logistics are fairly easy with transportation these days. Am I hitting on all the things that you're going to tell me? I mean, what do you do if I said, Morgan, I got 300 acres that I want to sell, and it doesn't matter. Buttonwillow, shafter, doesn't matter.
Yep.
It's ag.
Yep.
What do you do?
So the first, back to water. First thing is Troy.
That's your number one question.
Yep. So
that's the number one top line on every day we open the paper. Right?
So in Cuyama, for example, I'd say, Troy, we have two things that would love to work with you, but there's two things that could be potential barriers to entry to realize what your expectations of value might be. First is Cuyama's in an area that hasn't had much of an imported water supply to help recharge that static water level. There's a lot of wells there that have been extracting water from that basin. And with that, we haven't had a lot of sources that have come in to replenish that. So our exposure from potential of needing to fallow ground in order to create a reserve of groundwater pumping credits that we would recover from our well to farm our ground is going to create a situation where we're going to have, due to water, a net acres determination. So selling on the gross of all your acres, our position to want to market and sell the property that way is, as 1 year goes to the next and we move into this new era, that's something that we're going to have to address.
So you're saying that maybe it's 300 acres, but it's not usable based upon the water tables in the output.
And what the state of California or the Department of Water Resources would want to recognize as your water supply. So that would be an example of first going to and assessing water so dynamic from one district to the next. I'd try to, without you telling me, hey, Troy, do you have some APNs that you could provide to me or a general location? And then the first thing we do is we create a series of maps, a map set that we have. I take that information and then go to, what do we have available for water? And then do I know this area? Do I know what groundwater typically is in this area? I'm very familiar with, depending on where your ranch is located, what your total well depth will be, what your depth when you pressurize your pumping water levels will be. And I probably have a good idea, depending on where you're at, as far as your chlorides, total dissolved salts, and pH, your water quality.
Water is hard in Cuyama.
So yes. And there's also some soil pathogen issues due to some heavy rotation of potatoes and carrots through there.
Yes.
And we're getting even stricter on the methyl bromide or whatever the fumigation practices would be to mitigate those are becoming harder and more expensive to do. And then I would go out to the ranch and look at, the condition of the trees or the vineyard or the ground, and then probably come back to you with just, this is what I, visually observed, and these are the sales that are in the area. And, more often than not, to have things be pretty black and white and straightforward, we want to work with you on some sort of listing or understanding that if I work with you, not only you understand what my role is to play, but the associated cost and what the return is as far as what I think we would be looking at value-wise, from low to high to maybe most likely where we might land.
Interesting. I mean, I realize you sell, we'll call it virgin land, nothing's growing on it. And then there's developed land that maybe it's a vineyard, maybe it's almond orchard. Mm-hmm. Is it difficult for you to determine a price based upon market conditions and potential length of yield based upon the age of an orchard and so on?
Oh yeah, I think,
and maybe even the practices that fertilizing and water, all the things that could be stunting growth or promoting. I mean, how do you put a number on something? Going, well, it's. You see where I'm going?
Yeah. So
now I'm an outsider looking in, but I really never thought about what a volatile market to even try to consider. And there's so many hypotheticals, right?
Yeah.
And that's assuming the new owner is going to do the proper things to get the maximum potential.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's, two things that confronted with this situation of how do you navigate through it. One, you got to be respectful. Remember how we were mentioning that land is just near and dear to people's hearts, and there's a sentimental connection there, unlike owning a building or owning a rental house. So in kind of helping them understand as a farmer, I noticed there's some weed pressure there that, is kind of getting away from us a little bit. And I noticed that on the east side of the ranch, I see an aerial, there's some sand that comes through there, and our trees seem to be, kind of stunted. Have you ever, and you talk to them as far as cultural practices and agronomy, and they know that you have access and experience, and there's credibility there. So you kind of assess it through that. And then, when I mentioned the spectrum of value, it's in consideration of those facts. I mean, if we didn't have those, or if we could sell around those, we'd be at this end of value. But, we do have these things to consider. And so, we need to be prepared to land here, in this kind of mid-range of value. And
so is there an inspection? Like if I sell a house and, if the buyer is going to, doesn't have cash and there's a loan on it, a financial institution says we need a home inspection. Does the same thing happen in a farm? Yeah.
So you're going to need to get a phase 1 environmental survey done. There's lots of companies that do it. John Buck from Advanced Environmental Concepts is a friend of mine, but as a professional does a first-class job. And, he will be deployed by a bank that would want to make sure there's no environmental risk with the property. For example, if you have an above-ground, storage tank, an AST, and it's been leaking and you have, a Wasco sandy loam soil, that hydrocarbon drip by drip by drip will leach. It creates a plume, which can get to your underlying groundwater, table. That's a problem. So they do inspections to make sure there's none of that going on. Then you have, the appraisal company will look at the purchase agreement to verify purchase price. They'll go to sales comparable approach as far as appraisals, like the predominant methodology of determining value. So you have that, aspect of it. And then, banks, when it comes to lending against ag properties, Mission Bank, Valley, now Tri-Counties, Farm Credit West, obviously, they hire, water people that know as much as I do about, water and where you want to be and where maybe you don't want to be. And then there's an associated cost of those areas that can accommodate for whatever risk there might be there. And it's up to you as a broker to make sure you're putting together deals that fall within the market of those areas. That's what kind of makes what we do so niche, in that, Troy, you're not going to want to hire me to sell your home. I would be walking through and I'd be like, "Hey, Troy's got a nice place, huh? It's good. I like what he did with these countertops."
Right.
I don't know what the home next door sold
for. The things that don't matter. Right?
Yeah. But you bring me out into your almond orchard, I'll be able to pick up some things that, hey, here's some things I like. These are some things that would be, a little bit of a concern. But it is a very, the sales we have of ranches in the ag space, the one thing that's really unique is that it's very hard to get this sales data. It's not published somewhere. It comes through word of mouth and knowing people who are in this space.
It doesn't change hands a whole lot typically, so there's probably not a whole lot of history. It might have been on one family's for 50 years.
Correct. And it's not something that I'd say out of my book of business, 80% or even more is not like our listed properties. It's from, I know these people have known me and my family for decades.
Right.
And I know them, I know what they're trying to do, and they're trusting me to bring someone that's maybe a good person that would pay, the best value we can get.
Sure.
And bring them together. And, that happens. And it's not like there's a big paper trail outside of the grant deed and the documentary transfer tax that someone could go back to and see what it sold for.
Right. How about mineral rights? Is that
mineral
big
rights.
deal?
So for 14 years doing this, I've sold minerals once. Okay. And I only sold them. They agreed to sell them because there was an oil and gas operator on the surface that was not doing right by the surface owner.
Okay.
Tons of issues of spilt oil and
pollution.
And so the seller wanted to sell and the buyer wanted to buy, but he needed to rightfully, if I'm going to deal with this oil and gas operator, I have to also own the minerals. So I have the seat at the table to work through the lease with them to get them to clean this stuff up. And so we brought in a third party into the transaction that could monetarily put a fair market value to those minerals, and they traded with the land. That's the only situation where I've ever traded mineral rights in Kern County. You go up to Tulare County or Kings County, totally different.
Yep.
People don't care about, they don't have the oil and gas history that we do here, and you just don't sell mineral. For example, was talking about Elmer. Yep. He sold, a lot of land and was kind of a speculative real estate investor. He wasn't a real farmer. He retained the mineral rights off of every ranch that he sold and put them into a trust.
Wow.
Because he saw that these could be worth something someday. And so you just don't see him trade a lot here in the Kern County area.
Learning a lot here.
Yeah.
So I believe this is correct. My theory is, as I drive through the valley, and I have for years, from Cuyama, lived in Taft, and then, of course, to Bakersfield. And I've seen a lot of land gobbled up. But, I've always said, for example, carrots, and a lot of it was Grimway, Bolt House, maybe Eurasic back in the day in Cuyama. It was all dominated by them.
Bunny guys. Love. I used to love those trucks.
Yeah. And, my dad, because he had history in it, it's like, man, they have so much land. And then eventually, I want to say I learned, and maybe this is just my thought, these farmers don't own all that land. A lot of them lease property.
Yep.
So does Tech Ag get into lease agreements and leasing opportunities for farm operations as well?
Yes, we help. We that's not something that a lease and like how money trades hand. There isn't really a place or a market for like a broker, someone like myself, a middleman to be paid. But I help a lot of clients with acquiring leases, because chances are, if you're kind of building a farming base off of leases, you win some, you lose some. It's a tight business, and you're hustling and you're working real hard, and you're doing it out of your own retained earnings or some line of credit that you're pulling on, because you can't mortgage that land.
Right.
And so I help a lot of my contacts with acquiring leases. I'll help put together, lease agreements.
Right.
That we have a whole library of different leases that we can use. So yes, I help with tenant sourcing. I help with putting those together, and do it, out of goodwill to kind of build. We're talking relationships, build in equity in those relationships. And I have a lot of respect for guys that have built their farming operation off leases, because it's tough. And you can win some and lose some.
Sure.
Case in point, the biggest ones that farm off leases is if you go over to the coast, strawberry and head lettuce growers.
Okay.
Those are very expensive commodities to grow, come with a lot of risk, and a lot of those farmers are not, Driscoll or the Ryder brothers that own large swaths of coastal land.
Right.
They're tenant farmers.
Right.
And everything is more expensive, obviously, even in farming, as you go over to the coast. And from one year to the next, those guys can win big one year, and then you kind of give it away, the next couple of years.
Right.
And you got to be a good grower. And so we help with that, but it's not like our core of how we, retain money to keep the lights on.
Right. Morgan, do you ever get inquiries on investors wanting to just gobble up farmland?
Yeah, all the time.
So it's not always farmer going after more property. It could be, private equity firm calling you, says, hey, we got $100 million. We want to invest in ag. What do you got available in Kern County?
It's become, when I got started in 2008, I dealt with farmers looking to buy land from farmers. These days, I'm dealing with investment companies looking to buy ground.
Is that a harder sell, or is that a harder process than taking someone that understands the farming business and taking them out and showing them a property and making an offer on?
It is, yeah, Troy. There's a lot more hoops.
There's a lot of T's and a lot of
and then they will want to kind of dig into. They'll want to. I always call it fencing with ghosts. They'll think of things that aliens could attack too, but I don't think it's going to happen, at least not during the term of your ownership of this ranch. So that does create a higher cost of sale. And quite honestly, it puts another layer of responsibility in my situation to bridge the grower with these, investment groups, which are coming from areas and communities that aren't necessarily, Bakersfield.
Wow. I'm sure you already know all this, Stephanie, right? You have to deal with him every day? Yeah. Keep him in line? I try. Well, I know I learned a tremendous amount. I know Kyle had to step out. I know he learned a lot. You know, we've known you for a few years, and I knew that you were in the ag world. I knew your family's name and the Buttonwillow warehouse situation, and I did know that you were in the ag sales, but nothing like I learned today. I appreciate that, and we'd like to try to have a little fun before we let you out the door. Yeah. Just so we can, because you don't know what I'm getting ready to ask you, so we do a couple rapid fire questions.
Man, my hands are sweating.
Yeah, you should be.
Yeah.
So no, they're pretty easy. So what's a common myth about your job or field experience?
A common myth about my job is that I ride around in a pickup making cell phone calls all day. Mm-hmm. And the reality is that I probably should do more of that. It's a lot of desk work, a lot of paperwork. And when you own a big swath of land and you're trying to sell it, there's a lot of things that can get in the way of that land, whether it's title issues, environmental issues with wells that want to break down during the middle of escrow, and that's not what we agreed upon. So there's a lot of paperwork that comes with that. So I think that would be to do what I do, you're almost like an attorney that didn't pass the bar trying to manage, paperwork to help with the transaction, and less outbound, prospecting on trying to find a deal.
Yeah, I could see you doing a lot of research and being an analyst in a lot of different ways.
Yeah, more than I'd like, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I know. I agree. I love sales, and the worst part about my job is the desk job.
Yeah.
So I love.
Well, you probably have to deal with mountains of paperwork to do what you do.
Well, we have support staff too. Yeah. I just know enough to be dangerous, and thank God for the staff, because that's not my forte. But hey, who was your biggest mentor?
So I'd say it's two people. I think that life comes at you in phases, and I mentioned that phase where I lived back east. Yep. And I had a mentor in sales, a guy by the name of Scott Robb, who really had a great bedside manner with people, but his clients, and I learned a lot from him. And then when I came back to work in this space, my mentor was a guy by the name of Bob Hartnack, who was the gentleman I mentioned that kind of got me up and running and taught me a lot of things about some of the things you won't learn in a book, and how do you navigate through selling a ranch. So really always wish I could keep in touch with those guys more, but they had a real big impact on me.
Nice, very good.
And then my dad's a good guy that has a really innate way of making a big statement, but in very few words.
Sounds like my father.
Yeah.
Man of few words, a lot of wisdom, though.
Yeah.
So pay attention, listen. I can tell you come from a good upbringing. So if you could turn back time to your 18-year-old self, what would you tell him?
I would tell him that as much as he can, it's not always going to be the case, but as much as he can, remember it's not how you start, it's how you finish. And that's true in, I think, in athletic contests. Yep. That's true in your relationships, particularly marriage. I feel that's true in business. And I think when you're young, sometimes, myself included, when I was 18, I didn't realize how long life could be if you didn't hold yourself accountable to make the right decisions. And I think that I'm here today because I've made more good decisions than bad ones, but I'd be outright lying if I didn't make bad ones along the way. Sure. And I'm just hoping I try to learn from them and don't make them twice.
Yeah. Well said. Well said. We have Morgan Houchin, Vice President of Tech Ag Financial. Morgan, thank you for your service and thank you for your time today.
Yeah, Troy, thank you. I mean, I'm just glad this all, we played golf together and gotten to know each other, and you invited me here and getting to talk a little bit about our professional backgrounds, and you're doing a great job on the show, and I really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
The show has been brought to you by the Law Office of Kyle Jones, Troy Burton with the Lynn Company, CPA John Duffield, Scott Hansen Real Estate Lender, broker and investor, and Dave Plivlich, president and CEO of the Marcom Group and marcombranding.com. You've been listening to the Our 2 Cents podcast. Check out the show notes for links and more information about the show. Also visit our website at our2centspodcast.com or catch us on Instagram at Our 2 Cents Podcasts. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe and share with others.